Chapter 1 Vexing Problems. When he was nearly 17, Vex's life as a sick nurse came to an end, along with his mother's life as anything at all. He did not cry. He was too exhausted after months of trying to ease her suffering to cry at all. Instead, he opened her bedroom door and clapped his hand sharply once beside the ear of the servant girl sleeping in the hall, shocking her awake. "She's dead," he said shortly. He closed the door again and resumed his seat by the bed. For some 20 minutes, he sat and regarded his mother's corpse. Iraj arrived first, swinging the door open wide and pausing in the hall for a moment before venturing in. He did not seem to see Vex. All his attention was riveted on the emaciated body under its embroidered coverlet, finery Noemi had taken with her into banishment. Iraj stopped halfway into the room and simply stood, contemplating along with his half-brother. Omid and Felistus arrived minutes later. Felistus pushed his younger son to one side and approached the side of the bed. Unlike Vex and Iraj, he wasted no time in regarding the dead, but held a small hand mirror up before her nose and mouth. No fog clouded its surface. Vex watched dully as Felistus drew back. Felistus turned a narrow-eyed stare on him. "Get up, you mannerless wretch." Vex rose, still staring at his mother. He was pale, paler from his long weeks by Noemi's deathbed than his heritage had made him, and his eyes burned in his face. Nature had patterned him after both his parents, with his mother's slender frame and his father's fairy grace, but many sleepless nights had changed him from slender to gaunt. "Will you burn her body with incense?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, whether from tears or from long hours of whispering encouragement and pleas to his dying mother, no one could say. He asked for the proper rites, of course, burned after sunset so the soul of the dead would rise to the great Creator, and her pleasing traits would live on in her descendants. Felistus compressed his lips. He opened them only enough to say, "She'll be buried." All of Noemi's sons looked aghast at that, but the older two quickly changed their faces to somber acceptance. The jackals would dig her up and eat her within days of her burial, and her soul would dissolve. Vex looked at his mother's husband for the first time. "She said you would say that, and she told me to ask you what the priests will say when you tell them how you will write the corpse orders." Felistus wet his lips. What indeed would the priests say to a senior scribe whose wife had not been ailing, but put away? What would they say to a senior priest whose older son, so recently and highly praised, would be revealed to bear the blood of a deceiver? They could be expected to say many things, all of them unpleasant to the coarse family fortunes. "She does not deserve any honor," he said harshly. "They will say it is wise to cut off her spirit now, and they will commend me for raising such fine sons in spite of this unimaginable pain." The bones of Vex's jaw showed more starkly for a moment as he clenched his teeth. "They will ask how Omid has done so well in his test and risen so quickly. They will make him do the test over again in a room alone with a priest, and they will suggest sacrifices and payments." The sacrifices to dissolve a soul were expensive. The payments to hide these sacrifices from common knowledge were worse. "I have friends among the priests," Felistus said. "Omid works hard, and Iraj has won great praise on the front." His sons scarcely had time to blush before Vex smiled thinly, as one who sees an opponent misstep. "Why does Iraj fight on the front?" he asked softly. "Why should a scribe's son seek his own name?" "Because the wood demons ought to be stamped out," Iraj said. "Because they seduce our women and threaten our farmers and speak lies and evil things, and their children do likewise." He bowed toward his father and added, "If you will forgive me for speaking out." Felistus nodded in response. "A well-spoken answer, my son. However she is disposed of, the priests and the town shall know that the house of course remains trustworthy." Vex had grown red at Iraj's speech. He grew pale again at Felistus's words. "You can't bury her," he said urgently. "She asked to be burned. You can't do this thing." Omid spoke then, and his voice echoed his mother's soft, elegant cadences. "I wonder that you speak so forthrightly to us, boy. You are, after all, no more than your father was." Vex was a slave, Omid meant, and the reminder caused the coarse men to stand a little stiffer and look at the boy a little harder. But for nearly 17 years, Vex had been treated with all the care and love of a mother who had given up everything for the sake of her lover's child, her last child. For nearly 17 years he had lived as a beloved son and not as a slave, and those 17 years shaped his response far more than 7 minutes of new status could. "I am all that my mother was also," he retorted. "She was your mother too, Omid. By all accounts, your skill on the lute and the flattering words you used to win your bride have not come from your father. Shall your children's fingers stutter, or their tongues?" "Enough!" Omid snapped. "Hold your tongue, or we shall teach you your place. Would you have none of her compassion? Her humor? Her wit? Bah, Creator knows Iraj can't afford to lose any wits." Phelistus was closest to Vex, and Phelistus was the one to strike him across the face. Vex's head snapped back, and he fell back into the chair by Noemi's deathbed. "Be silent! By all my grandfather's beards, you have your father's insolence and your mother's sharp tongue. She will be buried tomorrow, and after that we will see if we can find a buyer who will take an untrained whelp such as you." He turned and led the way from the room, Omid and then Iraj on his heels. Iraj paused to close the door. For one moment, as he pulled the handle, he looked over his shoulder at Vex sitting slumped, one hand to his stricken cheek. For one moment, the two regarded each other, half-brothers and strangers. Then Iraj turned away, and the door closed on the slave and his dead mother. When the door had closed, Vex did cry, weeping silently until he fell asleep on the floor.